Dear students, welcome to lecture 10 in distributed systems. Today's topics are stub generation, RPC messages and server management. Before starting today's topic, I would like to review the previous lecture topics, that is introduction to RPC, remote procedure call, what is meant by it, what is the RPC model, where we have seen the client and server process, how the interaction will go between the client and server process, transparency in RPC, both the semantic and syntactic transparency we have discussed, and the last topic in last video is implementing the RPC, where we have discussed there the stubs which will act as one of the important layer both client and server sides. They are responsible for packing the message in the client side and unpacking the message received from the server in client side. Similarly, on server side also, the server stub will unpack the message received from the client and again executes the procedure on server side, and it gets back the result. The server stub will pack, means marshal the arguments and sends it back to the client. This is the important task of a stub. So here, how to generate those stubs on both client and server stub, client and server sides, the stub generation is important. So a stub in distributed computing is nothing but a piece of code. For what it is, it converts parameters passed between the client and the server during a remote procedure call. So it converts the message parameters or arguments. This one also we have discussed in the stub class. So stubs can be generated in two ways. One is manual and the second one is automatic generation of stubs. Okay. So here the client stub and server stub, just to revise it, I have reopened the figure. Here, after getting the call from the client machine, from the client, it packs the parameters and sends it to the RPC runtime environment of client. Similarly, here unpacks, gives it to the server, packs or marshals, converts the parameters and sends back. This is nothing but packing, means converting the parameters is this one. So here stubs can be generated in two ways, manual or automatic. In the manual method, where the implementer, means any programmer of RPC implementer, will provide a set of translation functions so that it converts them into their own stubs, so that a user can construct his or her own stubs. So this method is somewhat simple, means only the RPC implementer will provide all the translation functions necessary for stub generation and the user can construct his or her own stubs. It is simple to implement, but it can also handle very complex parameter types also. And another way is automatically. So this is the most commonly used method for stub generation. Manually also we can do, but automatic stub generation is the most commonly used method. For that purpose, it uses interface definition language. So the interface definition language is nothing but a language that can use it to communicate between the client and server process. If we have written some piece of code in one language and the server process is using another language, then also it creates an interface between the client and server process so that it can easily convert the data. So it uses an interface definition language. It is used to define the interface between the client and the server. It acts as a mediator between the client and the server. So this interface definition is nothing but a list of procedure names which are supported by the interface. So together with the types of their arguments and the results, for what type of interface names it has and what are the method or procedure arguments and what are the results will be there in an ideal. So this is sufficient information for the client and server to independently perform compile time type checking. Both the errors we can check, and it also contains some other information which helps the RPC to reduce data storage and the amount of data transferred over the network. So IDL acts as an interface between the client and a server. With the help of IDL compiler, we will generate the stubs automatically. So here also an interface definition also has information about the type definitions, enumerated types, user owned data types, and they can also define constants which can manipulate data from RPC calls. And we will have two concepts like export the interface and import the interface. So a server program that implements procedures in an interface is set to export the interface, and a client program that calls procedures from an interface is said to have the import the interface. If it is coming from procedures coming in a client program is said to have the import the interface. So when writing a distributed application, a programmer first writes an IDL. Before writing a distributed application, a programmer will first of all write the interface definition using IDL. The interface definition is processed. Whatever the written interface definition is processed by the ideal compiler, interface definition language compiler, to generate components which are combined with client and server programs. So in general, the ideal compiler will generate the client stub procedure and server stub procedure, and also the appropriate marshalling, means packing the arguments and unmarshalling operations in each stub procedure also generates by the ideal compiler itself. So all these stub procedures and a header file which supports the data types in the interface definition will be generated by ideal compiler. From where it will generate? It will generate the written definition, interface definition, which is written by the programmer. So the programmer first writes the interface definition using ideal. Using that ideal compiler, it generates the client stub, server stub, and the marshalling and unmarshalling operations in each stub procedure. In each stub procedure is nothing but both on the client side and the server side. And a header file will also be generated by the ideal compiler, and it supports the data types in the interface definition. So what this header file will contain, it is included in the source files of both the client and server programs. Means for example, we will also include stdio.h, which is a standard input output header files for compiling a C program. Without that, we cannot compile a C program. However, you can write a printf statement, printf routine or scanf routine individually, but we are having all those procedures in a header file. So like that, the given header file, ideal compiler will give some header file. If we add that header file, it will be useful for creating the client stub and server stub automatically. So header file is included in the source files of both the client and server programs, so that the client procedures are compiled and they are linked with the client program, and the server procedures are also compiled, they will be linked with the server program. So this is the automatic procedure of generating the stubs. Okay. Stubs play an important role in RPC. So there will be both client stub and server stub. We can generate them in two of the following ways. One is manual, in which the implementer will give some set of translation functions from which the user can generate the related own stubs. And the second method is automatic method, where we will use the ideal interface definition language, from which using ideal we will write the interface definition. That interface definition will be compiled and executed by the ideal compiler. We will export the interface and import, we will call it as an import the interface. After compiling, the ideal compiler will generate the client stub procedure and server stub procedure. All those will be included in a header file. If we add that header file in both the client and the server programs, both the stub procedures will be generated and they are compiled and linked to the server program. Similarly on the client program. That's all about stub generation. And the next topic is RPC messages. We all know that any RPC call will involve the client process and a server process, right? In any RPC call, both the client process and server process, which are located on different computers, will be there. So this mode of interaction between the client and server is nothing but the client asks the server to execute a remote procedure, right? That where that remote procedure will be there? On the server. The server will return the result of the execution of that concerned procedure or that request procedure, and it returns the result to the client. This is what happening in an RPC. So generally RPC messages can be of two types. So the two types of messages involved in the implementation of RPC system are call messages and reply messages. Normally think of that call messages. Who will send those call messages? Call messages are sent by the client. Sent by the client. We are calling means client is calling. To whom it is calling? To the server. For what it is calling? For requesting the execution of a particular remote procedure. So whenever the client calls to execute a remote procedure, he will send a call message. Similarly, another type of message is reply message. So these are sent by the server, right? It is obvious we are sending some request and the reply message will be getting from the server. To whom it will send? To the client for returning the result of remote procedure execution. Whatever result that procedure returns, it will be returned back to the client. So these are the two types of messages which are used in RPC. The protocol of the concerned RPC system defines the format of these two types of messages. So call messages. Since a call message is used to request execution, right? It always requests a execution of a remote procedure. So the two components involved in this call message. What are the two components in a call message are identification information of the remote procedure to be executed. Some name with parameters like that to identify which procedure need to be executed on a remote computer. That information will be provided as one component in call message. And the second thing is the argument necessary for the execution of the procedure. We have already discussed if any method or the procedure taking some number of arguments, we need to pass that much number of arguments to the procedure. Otherwise, it cannot execute that procedure. Adding of two numbers, we need to pass two numbers. Adding of three numbers, we need to pass three numbers. Like that, the required number of arguments necessary for the execution of the procedure is the second component. Only two components are there in call messages. First of all, call message is nothing but a request from the client to the server for execution of a remote procedure. What are the two components of call message? The first one is identification information. Whose identification information? Of the remote procedure to be executed. Which remote procedure is to be executed is the first component. What are the necessary arguments for execution of the remote procedure is the second argument. So in addition to above fields, means we have discussed these two. The call messages normally will have the following fields also. They are message identification fields. So it consists of a sequence number. For what we are maintaining sequence number means for identifying the lost messages or duplicate messages. When will happen the duplicate message? If there is any system failure and properly matching reply messages are not there, like that, in such a cases duplicate messages will be forwarded. So to identify what type of message it is, the another field is message identification, message identifier. Okay, And the next is a message type field that is used to distinguish call messages from reply message. So this message type field will tell the is it a call message or a reply message from the server. So this field will tell whether it is a call message or a reply message. So this field may be set to 0 for all call messages. Means if the message type value is 0 here, then we can think of it that message as a call messages which is sent by the client itself. If it is set to 1, then it will have all the reply messages like that. And the next one is client identifier. A client identification field is used for two purposes: to allow the server of the RPC to identify the client, means to whom I am sending this reply, and allow the server to check the authentication of the client. Is this request coming from the authenticated client or not? Like that we can check with this field. So a typical RPC, an example for RPC call message format is this one: remote procedure identifier, program number, version number and procedure number, arguments required for running that procedure, client identifier, message type and message identifier. This is call messages. And the next is reply message. Next type of messages in RPC is reply messages. So when the server of an RPC receives a call message from the client, what it will do? It could be faced with the following conditions. So it is assumed for a particular condition that no problem was detected by the server. For all these listed conditions, then it will normally execute the procedure. What are those conditions? The server finds that the call message is not intelligible to it, means it is unable to get that message, or if the message violates, means it is not as per the RPC protocol. So there will be, in some protocol we will have some rules which we need to follow in order to communicate in a network. Like that, if it violates the RPC protocol, in such a case also the server cannot find that call message as intelligible, means known. So if it violates, it is unknown, not intelligible to the server. And the second case is the server detects by scanning the client's identifier field whether it is the request is coming from the authorized user or not authorized user to use that service. Not all the procedures on the remote procedure can be called by any client. Only authorized procedures can be called. So it will check whether that service, means that asked procedure can be executed by the client authorized or not. The server will return an unsuccessful reply without bothering to attempt the execute the procedure. It will not try to execute the procedure. It will simply send that unsuccessful reply. And the server finds that the remote program version or procedure number specified in the call message, if it is not available, then in such a case also the server cannot find that remote procedure. If I have given some 100 as procedure number, if that procedure 100 is not there, in such a case also the server cannot execute that procedure. So again the server will return an unsuccessful reply. And the next stage is, if this stage is reached, means all the above stage is reached, an attempt will be made to execute the remote procedure specified in the call message. So this may happen when it is not able to decode the supplied arguments. Number of arguments may be missed, or all these cases may also be occur in communication. So there may be incompatible RPC interface used by the client and the server. Another case is an exception condition in which some division by zero occurs while executing the specified remote procedure in such a case also. And the next thing, the specified remote procedure is executed successfully if at all if these messages are handled successfully. So a typical RPC reply message format will be like this for successful and unsuccessful replies. So A is a successful reply and B is a unsuccessful reply message format, in which we have discussed the previous list of conditions. It will send the unsuccessful reply message. So message identifier, message type, reply status, it will reply it as successful, and it also returns the result back to the client. This is the reply message of a server in a successful attempt. But here it is an unsuccessful reply message format where the reply status is unsuccessful, and what is the reason for failure. If the message identifier is wrong, or some procedure number is wrong, or version is wrong, or number of arguments is wrong, that reason will be added and sent back to the client. So the reply status field is either set to 1 or to a non-zero value to indicate the failure. Okay, 1 or non-zero means -1, or any other number which is not non-zero value will be replied to indicate failure. Generally, the reply status will be indicated with 0. So that's all about the reply messages and call messages in RPC messages. Hope you all have understood this. Moving to next topic, server management. So today we have covered stub generation. In stub generation, we have seen automatic stub generation and manual stub generation. And the second topic we have discussed is RPC messages, where the two important message types are call messages and reply messages. And the third topic is server management. So in RPC based applications, there are two important issues that need to be considered for server management. They are server implementation and server creation. Okay, in server management, what we have discussed as server process, client process, in that the server management is important. For that, there are two important issues we need to handle, that is server implementation and server creation. First of all, we will be seeing the server implementation. So servers may be generally of two types, that is stateful servers and stateless servers. So what is meant by a stateful server? If any server is maintaining the client state information from one procedure call to the next procedure call, then it is called as a stateful server. If it is maintaining the client state information, it is stateful. If not, it is stateless. So in this case, means two subsequent calls by a client to a stateful server. See, for example, we are doing some shopping, online shopping. We have added one product to the cart. Again, we are continuing the shopping. In such a case also, it should remember, the web page should remember the client name, ID, or what the items are added to the cart, like that. Otherwise, the client need to start again from the customer need to start again from the beginning, like that. If it is stateful, it will remember the state information of the client. So here also, if we have any two or more number of subsequent calls from the same client to whom a stateful server So some state information which are related to the service performed for that client as a result of first call is stored by the server process. So when it is asking for the second call the same procedure, then it will use the stored information. So this state information is subsequently used at the time of executing the second call. Okay, hope you have got it. For the first call, it is remembering that, say for example, Sita asked Sita asked for executing some procedure. Similarly, again if Sita is asking the same question, then a teacher will remember that she is Sita and she will process the request and sends it back to the message to Sita. Like that, it remembers the state information and it uses that subsequent state information for executing the second call. Then we need not test either the client is authorized or not if it is remembering the state information. For example, let us consider a server for byte stream files which allows the following operations. Say for example, these are all the operations generally for a file we will do: opening a file, reading, writing and seek. Seek means this operation will cause the server to change the value of the read write pointer to the specified file identified by FID to the new value specified as a position. If we are saying that file identifier moving to 10th line, it is nothing but seek. And the closing of the file table, this is nothing but, these are some of the operations which we can perform on files. So here the file server mentioned, all the operations which are mentioned above are all stateful, because if it is a stateless, after opening the file we cannot close it, and client process is opening the file name and mode, and the server process is maintaining a file table with file identifier, mode in which we want to open or close the file, read the file or writing the file or executing the file is nothing but mode: read, write and execute. Read write pointer where it is there, like that. Open file name comma mode, some file name dot mode is read mode or write mode or execute mode. So it gives the request and the server process will process that request and it returns the file. After that, it reading the file, read FID 100 comma buffer. This is nothing but the read operation syntax. FID file ID, that one, what is the line number and the buffer. So read write pointer, it increments by n. So 100th line comma buffer. It also again returns the bytes from 0 to 199 and it again reads from the buffer written bytes. 100, next 100 lines, next 100 lines it will read. So this is an example for a stateful file server. And the next is stateless servers. The reverse of stateful is it does not maintain any client state information. So a stateless server does not maintain any client state information. So therefore every request coming from a client will require all the necessary parameters to successfully carry out the desired operation. Again, it need to introduce itself about the client. It need to introduce itself for every operation, means every execution of a procedure. So for example, a server for byte stream files that allows the following operations on files is stateless. If it is a stateless, read, write or the two operations. So the file server does not keep track of any file state information as before. Here the client, if a client wishes to have the similar effect, they should be carried out again. See here, in this case the client has to keep track of the file state information. Read file name 0 comma 100 comma buffer. So this operation, the client will read this operation and it returns the bytes. Again, here if you observe, we have given just here 100 comma buff, here FID 100 comma buff, next 100 statements. Here we are giving the pointer again that 100 comma 100 comma buff. So like that, if you notice in this case, the client need to keep track of the file. Read again, it will return the result. So this is an example of stateless file server. And the second thing we need to handle is, first one is server implementation and the second is server creation. So server creation, we have server creation semantics. In server management topic, we have discussed server implementation, in which we have seen the stateful servers or the stateless servers. So next second issue we need to handle in server management is server creation semantics. So based on the time duration for which the RPC servers survive, means how long extent or up to what extent the RPC servers can survive, are classified as, survives means get on, are classified as three types. They are instance per call server, instance per transaction or session server, and the third one is persistent servers. So instance per call servers, first one is the server creation based on instance per call. Instance per call, in the name itself it is there that it will be suitable or it will be exist for the duration of a single call. After making, servers belonging to this category will exist. Up to what time it will exist? Only for the duration of the single call. So a server of this type is created by the RPC runtime environment and it can handle only when a call message arrives. The server will be deleted after the call has been executed, means only after getting a call message the server is created. That server creation will perform the execution of the remote procedure. It gives back the result and the server will be deleted after the call has been executed. This is nothing but instance per call servers. So this approach of server creation is not commonly used because some problems are associated with it. Why? Because if that same type of procedure is asking by the client, then we need to recreate it every time. Then the servers of this type of are stateless because they are killed as soon as the service is done. Service is done. After that uh, serviced the call, it will be deleted. So in such a case also it is stateless server. And when a distributed applications need to successfully invoke the same type of server several times, this approach will appear as more expensive. Why? Because we need to recreate it every time. When we are getting the call message, we have to create a server. So this will take more expensive than the RPC procedure call expenses. So this allocation and deallocation of the process will take time. Memory space to provide the buffer space and control structures, all these headaches will be there in this type of server creation. And the next type of server creation is instance per session servers. So these types of servers belong to this category. So the servers belong to this category will exist. They will remain for the entire session of the client, entire session for which a client and server will interact. Means they will be there and a server will be there for the entire session, since the client will start requesting the message to the server, accepting the request and getting the response, all that entire session will be client will be there. So normally there is a server manager for each type of service. For any type of different types of services, there will be different server managers. So all these server managers will take care with the binding agent, which we will discuss in next lecture. So when a client contacts the binding agent, it will bind the particular server. So it specifies the type of service needed by the binding agent. So it returns the address of the server manager, and then it is executed, and the desired type of the job will be executed by the client. So a server of this type can retain the a useful state information between the calls, execute consecutive calls or any successive calls. It can remember by the server, and it can also present a cleaner, so that this type of server also will remember the state information. But one of the drawback is both the instance per call servers and instance per session servers will manage with a single client, means it can handle only one client at a time. So another type of server creation is persistent server creation, which is mainly an advantage is for more number of clients. Means this can persistent server can handle or can bound to several clients simultaneously. This is the advantage of client, so persistent servers. So in the previous methods we have discussed, previous two types discussed above are will not handle two or more number of clients. But here a persistent server can handle two or more clients simultaneously. So they are, in the previous one they are exclusively created for a particular client on demand. When the call message is received, then only in such a case only they are creating. So that server will work only for a single client in the previous. But here a persistent server is usually shared by many clients. At the same time, many clients can bound to the persistent servers. So servers of this type are usually created and installed before the clients that use them. So this can independently export its services by registering itself with the binding agent. So when a client contacts the binding agent for a particular type, the binding agent will select a server that is responsible for performing that job, and it also returns the address of the selected server to the client. The client then directly interacts with that server. Each client can interact with that server. So we have already said that persistent server may be simultaneously bound to several clients. So persistent server will also improve the overall performance and reliability of the system. So several persistent servers will provide the same type of service and may be installed on different machines, which provides the load balancing approach, which we will discuss. Topics covered in today's lecture are stub generation, both the manual and automatic generation of stubs, messages in RPC or of call messages and reply messages, and the topic we have discussed is server management, in which there will be two issues of server implementation. Server implementation can be stateful or stateless, and server creation. A server can be created in the three ways: instance per call, instance per session. Both these two types of server creation will involve handling only single client simultaneously, but in a persistent server we can handle more number of clients simultaneously. Thank you.